We got a very, very nice show lined up for you today. Coming up, you're going to want to be around at 9:35. Trust me on this one. A half an hour from now, we're going to talk with Mark Meckler. Mark Meckler is a phenomenal individual who is one of the co-founders of the Tea Party movement, the Tea Party Patriots movement nationally. But more than that, and more importantly than that, Mark Meckler also founded the Convention of States Project. The Convention of States Project is an extraordinarily important one. What it is an opportunity for Americans to come together under Article 5 of the Constitution and, yes, indeed, have a full convention of the states and essentially take the government back from take the country back from the government. It just very simply stated, to take the country back from the government. It's something that more and more Americans are revealing that they want. They want a smaller federal government. They want more local control. Almost 2/3 of Ohio voters favor the state joining the states. There are currently 12 states that have called for an Article 5 Convention of States, which would propose amendments designed to limit federal spending, federal power, and specifically over the states and American citizens, and to establish term limits for U.S. congressmen and other appointed federal officials, including judges and federal agency bureaucrats. It would drain the swamp, is what it would do. And just in short, descriptive terms, it would drain the swamp. And it is a very, very large undertaking, As noted, so far only 12. And I say that, carefully because just a few short years ago, you didn't have 12. You have 12 now. This is some very, very important work that is being done. And this movement is growing. There is no turning it back. This movement is growing. More and more Americans are saying we need to take advantage of the opportunities given us by our founding fathers via Article 5, and we need to take our country back. And I completely and fully support the Convention of the States. It's a national effort, again, but it has to be done at the state level, if that makes any sense. Each state has to decide for itself to be a part, to call for an Article 5 convention. And this is, it's essentially called an amending convention. The Convention of States movement has 3.6 million volunteers and supporters right now through all 50 states. 12 states have passed an identical resolution to call on Congress to set a time and a location for the convention. I had Mark on a couple of years ago when they were doing essentially a mock or a practice run, if you will, convention of the states to show exactly how this would work in Washington, D.C., and it was tremendously successful. So the movement is growing, and we're going to talk to Mark Meckler about where things stand. All right, 9:34 now. The Bob Frantz Authority continues on AM 1420. The Answer. All right, a new poll in Ohio reveals what I think most of us probably already know, at least in this listening audience. We want smaller federal government. We want more control in our local governments and thus in our own hands. Almost 2/3 of Ohio's voters favor the state joining other states. Currently, there are 12 of them, in calling for an Article 5 Convention of States to propose amendments designed to limit federal spending, federal power, specifically over the states and American citizens, and to establish term limits for congressmen and appointed federal officials, including judges and federal agency bureaucrats. In a statewide poll, more than 80,000 households of likely voters responded to questions about the president's job approval and their choice of U.S. senatorial candidates. And the party affiliation in favor of convention of the state show 50% Democrats, 71% Republicans, and 66% of other or no affiliation say, yes, we support a convention of the states. So what is it going to take to get this to happen? What is it going to take to get a convention of the states to amend the United States Constitution and revoke, if you will, some of that overreaching federal power that the government seems to have? Joining us now to talk about it is the man largely responsible for this. Mark Meckler co-founded and served as the national coordinator for the largest Tea Party organization in the nation, the Tea Party Patriots, in February 2012. So how about that? Over 6 years now, he founded an organization called Citizens for Self-Government. And in one of their most important projects, which occurred in August of 2013, he teamed with Michael Farris to form the Convention of States that we are talking about, an effort at the state level to call for an Article 5 amending convention to take the power back from the federal government. Mark joins us now from his home in California. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. I know you're up early to be here on AM 1420, The Answer in Cleveland. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to be with you today.
Good to talk to you. Thank you so much. So last time we spoke about this, and I spoke with Ken Epic, who's a strong supporter here in the state of Ohio, we were getting prepared for and talking about a mock convention of the states. And I don't remember exactly how long ago that was. I want to say 2 years ago, but you can correct me on that. Can you talk to us about the movement of the Article 5 convention since that time?
Sure. Well, yeah, it was just about 2 years ago, September 2 years ago. That was held in Williamsburg, historic Williamsburg. The convention itself brought together delegates from all over the country, 3 from every state, generally legislators or retired state legislators. And what that did is it put into practice the theory of what it would look like to hold a convention. It was incredibly inspiring. What I saw is good people from all over the country rise up and rise to the occasion and become great people. Since then, incredible momentum now. As you said, 12 states have passed the resolution. That's over a third of the way to the 34 necessary. The endorsers just keep coming on. So you have guys like Ben Shapiro, James O'Keefe endorsed last week, Pete Coors of the famous Coors Brewing Empire. So it's growing momentum all over the country now. 3.6 million people involved, representatives in every single state legislative district in the nation. We're well on our way to calling a convention. It's time to get Ohio on board.
I could not agree more. Let me ask you about the pace of growth and the pace of this process, because you just mentioned you have 12 states, you need 34. I'm looking at some of the endorsers of the Convention of States, including governors Greg Abbott of Texas, Scott Walker, Wisconsin, Jeff Koehler of Kansas, and there are 4 listed who are former governors: Bush, Huckabee, Palin, and Jindal in Louisiana. Why is it so hard, and why is it such a slow process to get all of these governors to sign on board? Because, Mark, it would seem to me this is exactly what they should want. They should want more local control. They should want more statewide control. I would imagine you'd have 50 governors saying, really? We can get out from under the thumb of the federal government and the overreaching power that they have to determine so many of the things that happen in our states. I would think that this would be a very easy thing to do to get governors to sign on.
It probably would, and I'll tell you, it's kind of funny because we've never asked governors to sign on. All the governors you mentioned, they came to us, volunteered to be supporters. And the reason we haven't asked is, and people misunderstand the process, in the state legislatures, both houses have to pass this resolution calling for a convention of states. But unlike legislation, because it's a resolution, governors don't have to sign it. And so this is really important. So we've never gone after the governors because we don't want to confuse people in the states. We don't want to confuse the legislatures in the states. We don't want them to think that we need governors' support. And so we've really never chased the governors. I think we'd have a lot more governors on board if we asked them to.
Okay, that's good. That's a great answer, and it's good to know that, because I could just imagine. And so now I'll just do the same thing, though, and I'll go to the state legislatures and say, again, why in the last 2 years are we only up to 12? And I do not intend to minimize the growth. I'm very, very enthusiastic, and you're right. I want to help this state become the 13th. But my question is, again, is there arm twisting that has to be done to get state legislatures to say, hey, we want more power of control of our state and take that away from the federal government? Because it doesn't seem like there should be.
No, there shouldn't be, and I'll tell you why. And there is really just one fundamental reason. So 2 years ago, Good Friday, virtually every leftist group in America came out against this. It was led by Common Cause, which is a George Soros policy organization, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Planned Parenthood, La Raza, every public employee. And they all came out against it. It was the largest single group press release ever signed on the American left. They're against it because they say what we intend to do is restore the power to individuals and to the states. They like power in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, there are a small minority of folks on the right that buy into that argument and are standing with the radical left. Hillary Clinton, by the way, herself personally, publicly came out against this. Howard Dean personally, publicly came out against this. And so you have a few folks on the right in the legislatures that are standing against this and standing with the radical left. It's confusing, it's frustrating, but that's really the reason we've been slowed down.
Are these people really on the right then? I mean, let's be real here. I mean, if you're a real conservative, if you really call yourself on the political right, you want local control. You want a minimum amount of interference and and overreach from the federal government. So these people aren't truly on the right at all.
I would agree with you, and I think this should be actually a litmus test for folks on the right. If you don't believe in local control, if you don't believe that folks in Ohio should make decisions for those. Right now, by the way, in Ohio, 65% roughly of your state budget is controlled by the federal government. So these folks that are against this, they like the status quo that way. And honestly, when I ask them, well, what's your solution? They just stare at me. They have no solution. They believe that we're going to lose the country in Washington, D.C. They're willing to let it go down. I would agree with you. I think it's a litmus test. They're not actually conservatives.
We're talking to Mark Meckler with the Convention of States. We called it the Article 5 Convention of States. I want to read Article 5, or at least the first sentence or two of it, and then get you to explain to people exactly what would happen here. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as a part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. I guess I'm going to read the whole thing. Provided that no amendment, because I was looking for a period and a break point in there. Can't find one. Provided that no amendment shall be, which may be made prior to the year of 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. So this is constitutional jargon that a lot of people don't understand and can't follow, especially when you read it fast the way I just did. Dumb it down for us and tell us exactly what that means.
Yeah, and this is really important. It's actually the simplest article in the United States Constitution. It is linguistically the shortest article in the Constitution. What it does is it gives us the power, us the people, the power to propose amendments to our Constitution and ultimately to make those and ratify them. And it was intended to give the people the power. So basically the way it came down is in 1787 at convention, you get to September 15th, 2 days before the end of convention, Colonel George Mason stands up. He addresses the assembly. He says, we have a fundamental problem. We gave the power to Congress to propose amendments, but they'd forgotten to give it to the people acting through the states. And so you read that 2/3 of either house can propose amendments. That's how all of our amendments have come. You'll notice they don't limit the power of the federal government. And so then they put in this second clause proposed by Mason, was unanimously adopted without debate, giving the states, when 2/3 of them call, the power to propose amendments as well. So the entire point was, when the federal government gets out of control, as the founders knew it would, the people would have a remedy to rise up and to stop Congress from being out of control. Let me give you a really specific example, Bob.
Sure.
So look, the American people, by large margins, over 80% for over 30 years, have supported term limits on Congress and some sort of balanced budget amendment. Congress has not proposed those and will never propose those. That's why we have the second clause of Article 5. We need term limits. We need to put fiscal restraints on the federal government. We need to take some power away from them. Congress will never do that to itself.
Mark, when you give that great explanation you just did, and it is very simplified, you say this lets the people do this. What's the people mean? What is that? Because I had people last time when you when we talked about this, and we had the in 2 years ago when you had the mock convention in where was it? It was in Williamsburg?
In Williamsburg, Virginia.
And people said to me, well, can I go? Can I go? What does it mean if people get to do this? And obviously there's a delegate situation there. How are delegates chosen to represent the people? Because for some people, they feel in fear that this is just the same thing that we have now. We send delegates representing us essentially in Congress to do our will and to do our bidding and to and to represent us. And then they go up there and they don't do it anyway. So how do we know that the people that we delegate to go to the convention are going to represent us and actually pass amendments to the Constitution that will be, in our best interests?
Sure. Well, let's just start with process. So it's what I would describe as purely federalist, which most of us who are conservatives, we believe in our federal system. That means that we have power in the United States government and the federal government, and then we have most of the power in the states. Is how it's supposed to be. So each state will choose its delegates or its commissioners how it sees fit. That means the legislature will make the method of choosing the delegations. They can send one commissioner. They can send 100 commissioners. Each state gets one vote when they go to that convention. Each delegate or commissioner, as selected, will be given instructions by the state legislature on what they can and can't do, how they may and may not vote. When they get into convention, they will debate in 3 subject matter areas: anything imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, anything imposing term limits on the federal government, anything imposing scope and power limits on the federal government. When 26 states agree in that convention that something would be a good suggestion to make, and it's important we remember these are only suggestions. 26 states agree. That goes out to the states for ratification, and then it takes 38 states to ratify anything to become part of the Constitution.
So it takes 34 states to agree to have the convention, but then it takes 38 for ratification from what comes out of the convention.
Yeah, so that's what we would describe as a super majority. That's actually really important because some people say, well, crazy stuff like, well, what if they decide to repeal the Second Amendment? Well, first of all, they can't even discuss it in convention, but let's assume everything goes crazy and somehow that happens. You'd have to have 38 states ratify that. And if you flip that math on its head, Bob, what it means is it takes only 13 states to prevent something from becoming part of the Constitution. And for people like you and me who are conservatives, it means it takes the 13 most conservative states, only one house in the 13 most conservative states. In other words, nothing that limits our liberty could possibly get ratified and become part of the Constitution.
So based on what you just said, Mark Meckler, and we're joined by Mark Meckler of Article 5 Convention of the States and Citizens for Self-Governance, what would be the likelihood that we can get 38 states to agree to ratify anything that might come out? If I'm being cynical, I'm saying, it's an amazing thing to get this convention together, but my goodness gracious, once it comes out, you have to have 38 states ratified. I mean, what if 38 states ever agreed on anything?
I actually think that's the very best question. I think that's the highest risk is you get out of convention, it's hard to get something ratified. Although I'll tell you this, Bob, what I think is going to come out of convention is nothing that's going to be controversial. In other words, what you're going to get out of convention are things like some sort of balanced budget amendment. Well, over 80% of the American public has supported that for 30 years. You're going to get some sort of term limits for Congress. Again, over 80% of the American public supports that. And so these kinds of common sense reforms are the only things that can get ratified. They're the great middle of America. The only people who oppose this process are on the far fringes of either side, where they kind of meet, where you get the lunatic fringe. So I think what you're going to get out of convention are common sense notions of term limits, of fiscal restraints on government. Here's another one you're going to get. The federal government lumps all these things together in a single bill. There's something called a single subject amendment. It means every bill, only one subject. So you don't get good people forced to vote for bad things to get good things. So these are things that the American public widely supports. I don't think it's a problem to get stuff like that ratified because state legislatures, just like Congress, not always filled with the bravest people. They listen to broad public opinion like that.
And is this the reason for this? We need to get the broad public opinion to talk to our representatives in Columbus, Ohio, and tell them we want to be a part of this? This is how we get Ohio to become the 13th state?
No, absolutely. Look, Ohio should be the 13th state. I would argue, having been in 44 states around the country, there's a lot of common sense in Ohio. I think it's a good representation of what America is and should be. I'm not talking necessarily the legislature, I'm talking the people of the state. Mm-hmm. And so this is the place where the best ideas are going to come from for the rest of the country or states like Ohio. Ohio should be on board. The way they get on board is by calling your legislator, letting them know you support the Convention of States. We're going to be there in the legislature in 19. We're going to make it happen.
Mark, based on the pace of all of this, your Citizens for Self-Government organization was started in 2012. This Convention of the States organization was started in 2013, and here we are. So 5 years later, we've got 12 states on board. Yep. Is that the pace to get to 34? Do we have to wait another 15 years, do you think, or is this picking up? What can you project?
I hope to retire long before then, but no. Here's what I would project. My best projection, based on what we know, we've passed in one house or the other in another 19 states. So you have to pass in both houses in the same legislative session. And so we're way further than it appears numerically. We've got leadership on board in a bunch of states. I'm hoping that we get another, say, 12 states in 2019, finish it off in 20, and hold the convention in 21. I expect this is going to be an issue in the presidential election in 2020.
Does the party that holds the White House impact the motivation, if you will, for states to want to join this?
I think it does, but I would say in a way it's neutral. And here's what I mean by that. When President Trump was initially elected, you had some people who said, well, do we really need to do this? And then they saw sort of the deep state rise up against the president and the administration and try to thwart his policies. I think we still see that every day. And so people who thought maybe we could sit back say, no, we have to do it. I also think people are saying, well, if we could get Trump elected, then we absolutely can get this done. So it's inspired some people. And then I think if you get a Democratic administration, if you get the Democrats take over the House of Representatives, or you end up with a Democratic president in 2020, I think conservatives will be more and more unified around this idea of limiting federal power.
Mark Meckler joining us from California. Last thing before you go, when the mock was held in Williamsburg 2 years ago, did they pass mock amendments that they would then mockingly, I hate saying it that way, but that they would then have to conceivably then get past the 38 state legislatures, et cetera? And if so, what were some of the top amendments that came out of that, if that's the way it was conducted?
Yeah, they did. So they passed out 6 amendments for consideration. The most interesting thing to me about that, Bob, was we gave them a limitation because of time. We were only there for a day and a half. We told them they could pass 3 in every subject matter area. They ended up with only 6 instead of 9. To me, it was interesting how seriously they took it. They couldn't come up with 6 that they agreed upon. And so that shows me how seriously they took it. But they did things like they had a 3/5 amendment where 3/5 of states could overrule decisions by the Supreme Court or decisions by the federal legislature. So I think that's a really important one in restoring the balance between the federal and the state governments. They imposed term limits on Congress. I think they were longer than I thought they should be. It was 12 and 12, so you essentially could be there for 24 years. So they had a whole series, and if people want to know about that, they can go to conventionofstates.com. They can search simulated convention. They can watch some of the convention. They can see the proposals that came out of it.
That would be a great idea, just to give people some incentive to know what could come out of this once it happens for real, as you say, targeting 2021 potentially to make that happen. Mark, listen, it's great work that you do and all of your organization there with Citizens for Self-Governance and for the Convention of States. If there's any other way that I can help try to turn our state and convince some of our listeners and the constituents to talk to their representatives and bring Ohio on board, please don't hesitate to get back in touch with me, and we'll talk again soon.
I appreciate it. Just have your listeners go to conventionofstates.com. Maybe I'll come and be in studio with you next time I'm in town.
That sounds like a great idea. Thanks very much, Mark. Conventionofstates.com. Mark Meckler, organizer and founder of this movement out of California. It's 9:53. We'll take a time out here, come right back, get some thoughts from you on AM 1420 The Answer. All right, 9:57 now. Thanks again to Mark Meckler for coming on from California to talk about the Convention of the States. And I'm looking at the website now. It is conventionofstates.com. You really want to check this out. And also, maybe I'll tweet it during the top of the hour break that is coming up here, and that'll precede, by the way, Peter Kirsanow. If you did not get your fill of Peter Kirsanow and his 2-hour stint guest hosting this show yesterday, you'll have him for another 30 minutes coming up at 10 o'clock. But maybe I'll do it during the break. I'm going to post the link to the Article 5 that I read, because I read it and I had to read it kind of fast. It was longer than I thought it was going to be, even though it is one of the shortest articles in the Constitution, strangely enough. But it is hard to follow. But if you really want to understand and follow this, I know that a lot of people within the sound of my voice right now, a lot of people in this listening audience are connected. You're connected to either state representatives or representatives of state representatives, whether they be communications people or staff, assistants, et cetera, et cetera. But, this is what it takes. This is what true grass movements are all about. It's about you and me getting out there and talking to the people in power and letting them know this is what we want you to do to represent us. If you believe that federal judges have too much power, like the federal judges who tried to block President Trump's travel ban, the federal judges who have tried to block President Trump from ending the TPS. If you are temporary protected TPS, is that what it was? The protected illegal immigrants. If all of these federal judges who continue to overstep their authority rather than just interpreting the Constitution and instead legislating actively from the bench, they ought to be term limited and they ought to be able to be removed from office when they do these things. If you believe that, and that's just one part of this, is the federal judges, by the way. Also, Congress should be term limited. How long can 85-year-old Dianne Feinstein be allowed to sit in the United States Senate, continuing without any fear whatsoever of losing her seat because of the demographic makeup, the political demographic makeup of her state? It should not be, because she can pretty much do whatever she wants without fear of having to answer to the voters. Even though technically she has to answer to voters because she has to be up for every re-election every 6 years, there's got to be a cap on that. And to me, that cap should be 2. No more than 2 terms in the United States Senate. For the House, cap it at 3. No more than 6 years, 3 2-year terms in the United States House. This is what the Convention of the States could bring about. An end to the lifelong held positions in the Congress and certainly on the benches as well. That's just part of all of this. So it is about grassroots, and it is about talking to your representatives, talking to the friends of yours who know the representatives. I see people whenever we have these political gatherings throughout Northeast Ohio, and I see the same people oftentimes, and I know they're connected. And I see some of the actual representatives themselves. It's time to get in their ears and tell them, we want more local control. We want to decide our fate and our future. We don't want it decided by lifelong appointees in Washington, D.C., who may have no idea what's right for Ohio.
Go to conventionofstates.com, press the button, sign the petition. More importantly, get 10 of your friends to do the same. When you sign the petition, then that sends a letter to your state legislator. You go on the list in their district as a supporter. We deliver those lists to the state legislators. It means something to them.